It was a cold, unforgiving night in the outskirts of Ashwood, a quiet town with streets that seemed to breathe their own secrets. Most locals avoided the derelict Blackthorne House, a crumbling relic of a bygone era that loomed like a shadow over the neighborhood. Its windows were shattered, the roof sagging under decades of neglect, and the walls were streaked with dark stains that seemed almost alive. In the dim light of the crescent moon, rumors told of a malevolent presence within, a force that fed on fear, luring those who dared enter only to consume their very souls. Ethan had always dismissed such tales as small-town superstition, but tonight, an insatiable curiosity gnawed at him, driving him to confront the unknown. He parked his car a few streets away, the tires crunching softly on frost-hardened gravel. Each step toward the house felt heavier than the last, as if the night itself resisted his approach. The wind whispered through the skeletal trees, carrying faint, indecipherable voices that made his skin prickle. Ethan clutched his flashlight, the weak beam flickering as he reached the rotting porch. Each board moaned under his weight, a warning that went unheeded. The front door hung ajar, rusted hinges groaning like a lamenting cry. Taking a deep breath, he pushed it open and stepped inside, immediately hit by the oppressive stench of decay, damp earth, and mold. The house seemed to exhale around him. The air was thick and cold, curling into his lungs like icy fingers. The flickering flashlight revealed peeling wallpaper, covered in strange symbols etched beneath the layers. Symbols that seemed to shift and twist when glanced at from the corner of his eye. A chill ran down Ethan's spine as the floorboards creaked underfoot, echoing in the hollow spaces of the house. Shadows gathered in corners, stretching unnaturally, dancing just beyond the reach of his light. As he moved deeper into the house, the sense of being watched grew almost unbearable. The air hummed with a low, vibrating tension, like the house was alive and breathing him in. Every instinct screamed for him to turn back. Yet he pressed on, compelled by a mix of fear and fascination. In the main parlor, a giant, cracked mirror leaned against the wall. Ethan's reflection stared back, seemingly ordinary at first, but something was off. The eyes in the glass didn't quite match his. They were darker, hollow, and unnervingly alive. Slowly, the reflection began to smirk, a twisted, deliberate smile that Ethan himself hadn't made. Heart pounding, he looked away, and when he dared to glance back, the reflection was gone, leaving only his own face, pale and terrified. A sudden, almost imperceptible thud echoed from above the attic. The sound was soft yet deliberate, reverberating through the empty hallways. Ethan froze, telling himself it was only the old house settling. But then came the whisper, soft, insidious, and dripping with malice. Go. Leave before it's too late. He shivered, an instinctive dread crawling across his skin. Rationality argued, yet something deep in his gut told him this was no trick of the wind. His flashlight flickered as he ascended the staircase. Each step protested, squealing under his weight. The further he climbed, the colder the air became, the shadows lengthening, stretching to block his path. The house seemed to shift subtly, hallways elongating, doorways narrowing, trapping him in a maze of despair. Somewhere in the darkness, faint whispers multiplied, overlapping voices, some pleading, some mocking, all laced with unseen menace. Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears. He wanted to run, but the stairs seemed endless, leading him closer to an unseen horror lurking above. When he reached the attic, he hesitated at the door, hand trembling over the rusted handle. The faint glow of the moon filtered through a hole in the roof, casting eerie patterns across the dust-choked room. Shadows pooled in the corners, moving with a life of their own. The temperature dropped sharply, his breath forming dense clouds that vanished almost immediately into the darkness. As he stepped inside, he felt a pressure around his chest, an invisible hand squeezing. making it hard to inhale. The room was larger than he expected, impossibly so. The corners vanishing into black voids. Boxes, old furniture, and broken toys lay scattered, covered in a thick layer of dust. But the thing that froze his blood was the sound of slow, deliberate scratching, coming from every wall at once, as if the house itself were clawing at him. Ethan swung his flashlight, revealing fleeting shapes, figures standing just beyond the beam, vanishing whenever he tried to focus on them. The scratching intensified, echoing like nails on wood, accompanied by whispers that grew more urgent. "You shouldn't be here. Leave." A sudden movement at the far end of the attic made him freeze. A figure appeared, cloaked in shadow, its face obscured, yet somehow Ethan felt its eyes boring into him. The room's atmosphere thickened, pressing against his skin, twisting reality. The figure lifted an arm slowly, deliberately pointing at him. The walls seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat, the ceiling stretching higher and the floorboards threatening to collapse. Shadows slithered across the floor like living creatures, brushing against his legs, tugging at his clothing, threatening to pull him down. Adrenaline surged. Ethan bolted, stumbling over crates and fallen furniture, the attic seemingly reshaping itself to block his escape. Doors slammed shut with thunderous force, trapping him in the expanding maze of horror. The whispers now formed words, coherent and horrifying. "We are always watching. We are always hungry." He felt his mind strain under the weight of the voices, each syllable a needle pricking at his sanity. At last, he spotted the staircase leading down, though it seemed impossibly far. Each step stretched before him like a warped reflection, mocking his attempts to flee. His flashlight flickered violently, casting grotesque shadows that mimicked him, danced ahead of him, and leered with glee. A sudden cold hand grazed his shoulder, a brush so light it might have been wind, yet heavy with intent. Fear roared through him. The air vibrated with anticipation, every shadow waiting for the moment to strike. He descended blindly, tripping over steps, scraping his hands on splintered wood, desperate for the faintest hint of normalcy. The whispers ebbed slightly, replaced by a low, rolling resonance that vibrated through the floor, the walls, and his bones. It was as if the house itself were alive, breathing around him, savoring his terror. Every instinct screamed to leave, yet he pressed on, driven by a combination of sheer survival and morbid curiosity. Finally, reaching the main hall, Ethan felt a flicker of hope. The front door loomed ahead, broken but promising escape. Shadows still lingered, slinking along the walls, but they receded when he aimed the weak beam of his flashlight at them. The house seemed to sigh, almost reluctantly, as he stumbled onto the porch. The night air hit him like a physical force, biting and bitter, carrying the scent of wet earth and decay. He dared to look back, and though the house sat in eerie silence, he felt its eyes upon him, waiting, patient, unyielding. Ethan ran to his car, heart hammering, limbs trembling, leaving the Blackthorne House behind. The whispers faded with distance, yet the cold clung to his skin, a reminder that the house never truly let go. It waited, hungry, patient, for the next brave, foolish, or curious soul to enter its shadowed halls, feeding endlessly on the terror it conjured. Ethan's breath came in ragged gasps as darkness swallowed him entirely, a suffocating void that seemed to press in from every direction. The whispers had grown louder, a horrifying symphony of voices layered over one another, some pleading, some mocking, all dripping with malice. Each step he took felt heavier than the last, as if the house itself had wrapped invisible chains around his legs, dragging him towards some unseen fate. The shadows clung to him, twisting along the walls and floor, curling like living smoke, crawling along his skin with cold, sinister intent. Somewhere in the distance, the creak of rocking chairs echoed, A sound that made no sense in an empty house, yet it echoed relentlessly, as if mocking his attempts to stay sane. He stumbled forward, guided only by the flickering beam of his dying flashlight. Every corner seemed to elongate, hallways stretching impossibly, doors leading to nowhere, as if the house itself was reshaping its interior to trap him forever. The attic door loomed above, faintly illuminated by the ghostly moonlight leaking through the holes in the roof. It seemed farther than it should have been, every step up the staircase stretching endlessly, a corridor into despair. Ethan's mind screamed at him to stop, to turn back, but he could not. Some primal urge, fear, curiosity, or perhaps a foolish sense of defiance propelled him onward. As he reached the attic door, he hesitated, hand trembling over the handle. A cold draft spilled from the room, carrying with it the smell of rot and something far fouler, like the air itself had been tainted by centuries of death. He pushed the door open and stepped inside, and immediately the world seemed to warp around him. The attic was impossibly vast, far larger than the house should physically allow, the corners disappearing into infinite darkness. Dust choked the air, mingling with faint motes of light that danced like tiny fireflies, illuminating old furniture, broken toys, and rusted boxes. Shadows gathered in impossible formations, stretching along the walls and ceiling as if alive, moving in ways that defied logic. Then he saw them, hundreds of mirrors lining the walls. But they weren't ordinary mirrors. Each one reflected not him, but twisted versions of people he didn't recognize. Faces distorted in eternal terror, mouths frozen in silent screams, eyes wide with unspeakable horror. Some faces shifted into grotesque grins, others melted into shadow. And at the center of the room, a figure floated, impossibly tall, shrouded in darkness. Eyes like empty voids that seemed to swallow the light. The air around it pulsed with a malignant energy, thick and suffocating, like a storm of pure dread. "Welcome," the figure hissed, its voice a chorus of 1,000 tortured souls, overlapping and layering in a way that rattled Ethan's mind. "You can run, but you cannot escape. The house, it feeds on fear, and now it feeds on you." Ethan stumbled backward, his flashlight shaking in his hands. He wanted to flee, but the floor beneath him seemed to stretch into a void, a yawning chasm that threatened to swallow him whole. Mirrors reflected his every movement, but not as they should. In some, his reflection screamed. In others, it laughed at him with cruel, twisted malice. He felt as though he were being pulled into each one, each reflection a trap. A window into the terror the house had stored from every soul that had entered before him. The whispers became screams, layering on top of one another, forming a chaotic melody of torment that penetrated his mind. Why? Why is this happening? Ethan's voice cracked, echoing unnaturally in the room, swallowed almost immediately by the overwhelming presence. "Because you dared to look," the shadow whispered, its tone both patient and venomous. "Because you ignored the warnings. Fear, it sustains me. It sustains the house. Every heartbeat of terror you feel, every drop of sweat, every shiver, it becomes mine." Ethan's mind reeled. Logic and reason had abandoned him long ago, replaced by raw, unfiltered panic. His reflection in one of the mirrors moved independently, stepping forward with deliberate malevolence, grinning in ways he couldn't comprehend. Every mirror seemed to ripple like liquid, distorting the room, bending reality, and amplifying his fears. He was no longer just in a room, he was inside the house's mind, trapped in a living nightmare, a cage built from his own terror. Desperation clawed at him. He saw a faint outline of the attic hatch above a possible escape, the only light in the oppressive darkness. With shaking hands and a racing heart, he lunged toward it. The mirrors around him shuddered violently, their surfaces rippling like disturbed water. and the reflections screamed at him, faces twisting into silent shrieks, mouths moving with words he could not hear. Shadows surged forward, tugging at his clothing, clutching at his hair, whispering vile promises of eternal torment. Ethan reached the hatch, fingers scraping against splintered wood, heart hammering as if it might burst. He pulled himself through, tumbling into the narrow corridor of the attic, door slamming behind him with a force that rattled the walls. For a brief moment, silence descended, oppressive and unnatural, broken only by his ragged breathing. He pressed on, stumbling toward the main hall, every step bringing him closer to the unknown. The front door finally came into view, battered and warped but real, a fragile promise of escape. Shadows still lingered along the walls, reaching, stretching, but they recoiled when he shined the beam of his flashlight on them. The whispers faded, though they lingered at the edges of his hearing, faint and insidious, promising that the house would not release him entirely. Trembling, he pushed the door open, stepping into the bitter night. The cold air bit his skin, carrying the scent of damp earth, decay, and something older, darker like the breath of centuries of fear. Ethan ran, limbs trembling, lungs burning.
Please like and subscribe channel Fear Frequency for more horror stories. Thank you.